You're watching Lore of the Internet, and this is Holy I Overslept. I once missed Monday entirely. Went to work Tuesday without realizing it. I fell asleep Sunday and woke up Tuesday. I was working at a hotel as a house person, laundry and garbage mover, when I was about 18. This older dude Dave goes home at 3:30 p.m. and shows up at 7:30 p.m. f***ing hammered. He's knocking over carts, spilling garbage everywhere. Hey Dave, what are you doing here? Through slurs as thick as corn syrup, Dave stammers, I drank a bottle of whiskey. I fell asleep on the couch, and next thing you know, I'm late for work. It's still Tuesday, Dave. Oh, I laughed my dick off. I've done this. My workplace has alternating Mondays off, federal holidays off, etc. And sometimes the alternating Mondays off will get you knocked off course because of a federal holiday. They don't like giving us 2 3-day weekends in a row, and unless you pay attention to the work calendar, you could forget that you have to work on Monday. So anyways, I had a really laid-back supervisor at the time, and I had been working on a project where I just went into my office and stayed on my computer doing paperwork almost all day, every day. I start work at 7 in the mornings. I wake up at about 10:30 a.m. and see a text from my coworker saying, "Do you mind if I borrow the label printer?" It wasn't unheard of for this coworker to do overtime on an off day, as his section was short-staffed and just him doing 3 people's jobs. I text back, "Sure." He texts back, "Thanks. Enjoy your day off." I just thought, it's weird that he'd refer to my weekend as a day off, but dismissed it because he's a weird guy in the office. I got up and cooked myself some pancakes, went fishing, and had a hell of a day off. I came in the next morning and my coworker tells me that he put my label printer back in my office, and I said something along the lines of, "Man, you've been coming in and doing a lot of overtime. You need any help?" And that's when he told me Monday wasn't an off day and that he assumed I'd taken leave. I practically ran to my supervisor's office and burst in with, "I forgot yesterday was a work day and I didn't come in. I'm so sorry." His response was perfect. "You weren't here yesterday? Like ever?" I said, "Yes." "How close are you in your project right now?" I told him I was close. "You think you could finish it today?" I told him no, and that I would need at least a day and a half. "You think you could finish it today if you stayed a couple hours late?" I told him sure. "Then don't worry about putting in leave requests for yesterday." So that was great. Side note, I finished the project an hour earlier that day, and he was so happy that he just told me to go home early. I miss that guy sometimes. Higher supervision bagged him on being too lax on us, but I don't think they ever realized that he was the reason we had such a high morale and good productivity in our shop. When I was younger, I used to have to take the train to school. I fell asleep once and woke up in San Francisco, and my high school is in Palo Alto, which is over an hour away. Freshman chemistry at Virginia Tech, one of those huge 500-plus person classes held in an auditorium where the professor wouldn't recognize or care if you're part of the class or not. The class ran from 8 to 8:50 a.m. I had an exam and I set an alarm for 7 a.m. I woke up to look at the clock and it's 8:40. I throw some clothes on and haul ass over to the auditorium. The exam has to be turned in at 8:50, no later. I run in at 8:48, grab a Scantron, and fill in C for every answer and turn it in. 2 things I learned from that class. 1. Don't take 8 a.m. classes if you're not a morning person. And 2. Don't share an alarm clock with a roommate who goes to sleep after you and changes the alarm time after you've already set it for 7 a.m. I had a coworker once that was late all of the time. I guess he was bad at getting up right away when his alarm went off, so his roommate would call his phone just long enough to turn off the alarm so he wouldn't have to listen to it anymore. I know he probably should have gotten an actual alarm clock, but what a jerk his roommate was. I was taking biology my freshman year of college, and to this day it was my most difficult class. The professor was really great. The only thing he was ever strict about was the final. He made a huge deal about not being late. He repeated about 10 times that if you were even a minute late to the final, you wouldn't be allowed in and you wouldn't be allowed to retake it. I made sure to be the good student that I normally wasn't. I studied early so that I wouldn't have to cram. I went to bed early, set my alarm, laid out my clothes, the whole 9 yards. Something happened to my alarm as it didn't go off. I looked at my clock and I had about 2 minutes until the final. There was no way I could get from my dorm to the class on time, but that didn't stop me from trying. I tore out of bed and just ran. I showed up at the door with my flannel pajamas, hair a mess, no shoes, crying and breathing heavily from running. I was like 5 minutes late. I just looked at the professor, and before I could choke out the words between sobs, he just looked at me and said, "Take a seat, calm down, finish the test when you're ready. I have no idea what I got on the final, but I did well in the class, and now I have a fear of not waking up to my alarm for important events. Not exactly oversleeping. Someone pulled the fire alarm in my dorm during finals. I was sleep deprived and genuinely slept through the blaring siren in the hall. The fire department goes door to door with a master key and checks every room. They found me asleep. Middle of December, middle of the night, they lined me up outside with everyone else, wrapped in a skimpy blanket and flip-flops. They wouldn't let me dress until the building of 900 people was cleared. Probably a half an hour, but it felt like a week. I also got fined $50 for ignoring the fire alarm. I slept through an exam in the room it was being given. It was in high school Spanish. We had a vocabulary part and an essay. I did the vocab and for some reason decided to rest my eyes for a minute. Well, the next thing you know, people are getting up and leaving. I was like, what the f***? They all said they thought I was finished, so they didn't wake me. The teacher was somewhat sympathetic and said I could work on it until the next exam period, which was 15 minutes later. So I hammered out a crappy essay in Spanish, and pretty sure she took pity on me because I got a B on the exam. I woke up in a cold sweat, realizing I fell asleep with a massive term paper due that morning, and I didn't even start because it wasn't mentioned by the teacher, just listed in the syllabus. And my something's not right senses decided to wake me up on the day it was due at 4 a.m. and I legitimately threw myself out of bed, full speed ahead. Then my brain started to warm up and I realized that I'm in a country 6,000 miles away from my university and that I graduated 5 years ago. And the professor no longer works there. I googled it just to be sure. Sadly, it's not a super interesting story. About a decade ago, I was having some fairly serious sleep issues. I've always had troubled sleeping patterns, but it got to the point where I wouldn't or couldn't go to sleep for days at a time. I felt like I was going insane. I pause here to mention I now have 9 years of sobriety. I guess it never occurred to me that my then opiate addiction was exacerbating my sleep problems. I was stupid, clearly, but I figured pills could probably help because at the time pills helped everything. Don't do drugs. Anyhow, I went to one of the doctors I had on rotation who I knew would easily give me a prescription. I went home, took 2 because once you start abusing pills, you figure 1 isn't enough, no matter what anyone says. I fell asleep around 5 p.m. on, I think, a Wednesday, and I woke up around 8 p.m. on Thursday, after my roommate banged on my door for an eternity. My boss had eventually called him to find out if I was dead. I was so disoriented, and I felt super hungover. I had a zillion missed calls and text messages on my T-Mobile Sidekick, and it took me a while to realize that the reason I had so many was because it wasn't 2 or 3 hours that I'd slept, but like a whole day and then some. It really scared me. I called my boss and explained what happened, and since I had documentation from the doctor and the new script, I didn't get fired. I ended up selling the rest of the Ambien I had. Jesus, hold me, come on. And maybe 4 or 5 months later, I ended up detoxing and doing the whole sobriety thing. First period teacher in high school was an asshole who made a big stink when students showed up late. Me being the timid student that I was, feared this heavily, so I made sure to be on time to avoid the embarrassment. One morning, I woke up and realized I had slept in and had very little time to get to school. I got changed in record speed and was out my door in minutes. The walk normally took about 15 minutes, and I was at the front doors of the school in like 7 minutes. But the doors were locked. It was Saturday. Worked from 6:30 to 2:30. I took a nap, and when I got home, I looked at the clock and it read 6:30. And I launched out of bed and got ready just to realize it was the same day. If you've ever had this happen to you, be sure to let us know in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this content, make sure to like us on any of the following platforms. Until then, we'll see you in the next episode.